So, that this economic system has a lot of promise, and it's something that people would do well studying. And I know a very good friend of mine, Dr. Anwar, would have a lot to say about that. Maybe you should invite him sometime to give a talk.
As a Muslim scholar, I would just like to know, what is your opinion of some of the intolerance that some of these Muslim countries put on to Christians and Jews, for example, not being able to build new churches, not being able to repair old ones, no outward signs of their faith, that sort of thing?
Right. Yeah. Sadly, that happened, and I am completely against it. I mean, what you're talking about sadly happens in Egypt, which I'm from, and I do have some very good Christian friends, and it's not as bad as people put it, because there are ministers, for example, in the Egyptian government who are Christians. If you're familiar with one of the former UN secretaries, Boutros Ghali, he was an Egyptian Christian who was nominated for that post. So it's not that they're very hardly persecuted, but there is some element of things that I wish would not there. And as I said, it's a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of strength. It is something that saddened me because it signifies some insecurity that people have, and whenever I get a chance, I speak against it. Now, let me also add a little thing to that part of it is not Muslims, or actually the main part of it is not Muslims necessarily doing some oppression or harassment to Christians, but it's part of a corrupt political system. This political system puts similar pressures on Muslims. So I myself, for instance, was once denied entrance into a particular building because of my beard, as small as it is. Okay, and I was ordered either you go ahead and shave it, or you can't enter that building. Okay, so it's it goes beyond that.
But would you say that is that something that if you is in a strict reading of the Quran, or is that just a bad interpretation?
It's against a good reading of the Quran. Okay, I mean the Prophet, peace be upon him, once said, "Whoever hurts a dhimmi," and a dhimmi means a person who is from the people of the book, or even more generally a person who has a treaty with Muslims, then I personally, the Prophet talking about himself, I personally will be his prosecutor on the day of judgment. So it's, from that point of view, it's completely against. Again, people do take things out of context in certain times and want to use them and not use the other, whereas a fuller reading will show you that this is against it.
Jesus died and gave salvation to every single person. What can you say about Prophet Muhammad in this regard?
Well, so this is a point of difference, and I'm glad we're talking about our differences. But what we believe is that salvation cannot be gotten from a different person. Okay, so we actually have already a difference on whether Jesus really died or not. I mean, if you the verse that I mentioned from Mark, what Muslims actually believed is that God's will, as it happened, was actually to spare Jesus that trial, and that he was lifted into heaven. Now, I know that Christians have a very different story with the crucifixion and the resurrection and so on. But regardless of that, even if that part is true, then the Muslim doctrine is that salvation cannot come from a different person. Each person is responsible for him or herself. Now, that's not to say that you'll get salvation by your deeds, but you get it by God's mercy and your deeds showing your willingness to receive that mercy. Okay. Now, from what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did, in my opinion, is that he worked tirelessly for these 23 years of his mission to deliver this message and to educate people and to inform them of how to lead a life that's consistent with the will of God, just as Abraham did, just as Moses did, just as Noah did, and so on.
Other question is, why do you feel Islam specifically is the right way? What are your convictions founded on?
Okay. Excellent question. Really excellent question. And it could take us all night, but I don't intend to do so. But let me kind of summarize the reasons. Among them is the fact that it's consistent with all of the previous messages in many places. So Islam is not that different from what we think Abraham's faith was. And all Christian, Jews, Muslims agree that Abraham was a great person. And really, if you think about the essence of Islam, they're not really different from what Abraham was or from what Moses was. I mean, the only difference, even with Christianity, when I read the Gospels, I can agree easily with 90-95% with what's there. I mean, the only place where I start to differ is when the resurrection or the Trinity gets mentioned. But other than that, the moral code makes a lot of sense and is the same as the one in Islam. So from that point of view, it's really a question of convictions. Why am I not convinced with the Trinity, right? Why am I not convinced with the resurrection? And it's just for me, they don't make sense. And with all due respect to those who subscribe to that, I mean, I know there are people here like that. And as I said, we don't have to sugarcoat our words and just say to each other, it's great that you have. I mean, quite simply, I didn't find that 3 = 1 made a lot of sense to me. Again, with all due respect to those who believe in that. There is another issue of the historical verification of Islam. Islam, the Quran that we have today is word for word, letter for letter, the same one that you'll find in any Muslim country, and the same one that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Whereas with the other texts, you find different versions, and in some of them you find different stories, and in some of them you find stories that are not very becoming of the message that they're teaching. So when I was talking about the list of prophets, I had Solomon initially in there. And Solomon in Islam is a very respected figure, is a man of impeccable character. Whereas if you look at the sensational stories in the Old Testament, you see a completely different person that's not very godly, that's worshipping idols, that's kind of chasing behind women and so on. So from Muslims' point of view, they view this as a result of different people writing and rewriting the stories, so that they got colored by the human part of them, and they were not inscribed as they were. Whereas in Islam, the Quran was written and transmitted as it is, even if people didn't understand certain parts of it. I mean, they did have a very good understanding of it, but if something seemed to differ from what they believed, they still wrote it as it is. And they trained themselves to know that this is the truth that they have to follow, not that what they think is the truth and they have to change the text to follow. So these are a few reasons. I'll be happy to talk more about that in another time. Yes.
What do you think it's going to take to unite even the different sects that are in Islam, like the Sunni and the Shia, and then more extreme forms like Wahhabism? Like, what are your views on that?
Well, it goes back to this idea of agreeing to differ, agreeing that the others have the same convictions that you have, without letting go of yours. Because many a times the approach towards that is to try to eliminate the differences. And that's not going to work, because each one is going to cling to his beliefs and even become more extreme about them if the other is trying to pull them away from it. But it's more of a realization that the teachings, the original teachings, never taught for you to fight one another. I mean, in fact, in Islam, again, and this is kind of surprising because, the Quran predicted things like that are going to happen. Muslims were severely warned against dividing against one another and fighting one another.